There are people coming to my channel and they want to test me if I'm some kind of a Chinese propagandist, right? And they always ask me this kind of Fox News, CNN questions, Peter Zeihan questions. And one of the popular subject is regarding China's demographic collapse, right? So I want to make a video today on this subject that aims to debunk and also to inform my audience. It's going to be let's put it into a two-part video, okay? First part, I will be explaining some of the problems regarding China's birth rate. And then second part will be on how, let's say, Chinese demographic issues might impact our economy and our economic growth and prosperity in the future. Um, I'm going to bring in a famous Chinese economist, the ex-mayor of Chongqing, Huang Qifan, and use some of the things he said just recently as a reference. First, let me try to dissect the mainstream narrative here in the West, in the US in a nutshell, okay? China is run by an evil, aggressive dictatorship government, which is a threat to the free world and to democracy, of course. It has 1.4 billion people, very scary, right? With massive manufacturing capacity. But the good news, okay, here's the good news, is ultimately China faced two major problems that it will never overcome. It has a demographic problem, aging population and younger generation don't want to have kids. So as long as the rest of the free world hold on for another decade or so, the Chinese population will shrink and the economy will shrink, the country will collapse again into the footnote of history and it won't be able to conquer the world. So that's the good news, right? That's what we get here in the Western mainstream media. So that's the chain of thoughts, and many people's understanding is within that radius and it's kind of anchored to it from how I talk to them. So they somehow build a connection between China is in decline because the population is in decline and irreversible, and the free world will be safe, something along that line. All right, I have many Chinese in my channel, so I'm going to address this issue, and Chinese in this channel can, correct me if I'm wrong, okay? Now, first, you can talk to almost, okay, anyone in China today. I can guarantee you that 99% of the people, maybe even 100% of the people, will tell you that there's too many people in China. And I'm not joking. We have 1.4 billion people and not a single one. I bet even Xi Jinping will tell you that we have too many people, okay? No one, and I really mean it, no one will say that, okay, we have 1.4 billion, we need 1.6 billion. You're not going to find someone like that. And this is a topic I actually talk with many politicians and intellectuals in China. And again, this is when I need my Chinese audience to get into the comment sections and kind of make some noise and help me out with this. The optimum population size for China, and I know this is going to be controversial, especially when people from the West is hearing this. The optimum population for China within our current geographical boundaries, okay, should be around 800 million to maybe at most 1.2 billion. I've seen people say that even lower, okay, to maybe around 600 million, but I would say that 800 million to 1.2 billion seems to be the sweet spot. And later in this video there will be more explanation as to why. Now, I'm not going to speak for any other countries in this world. For example, France is at 68 million, Italy is at 58 million, and Spain is at 48 million population. If I walk up to a person in those countries, would they say the population is too low, too high, or just about right? Can Europeans tell me about your countries, and do you think you guys have enough population, too much, not enough, or something like that? But I can say with absolute certainty, Chinese people will always tell you that we have too many people today in China, just way too many. I'm not just talking about a little bit too many, but just way too many. Okay, and this is this is a geographical issue. Majority of the population in China is saturated within only a small part of the country. I think there's this line called, let me check. Oh, this is called Hu line. A huge part of China is just not suitable for human to live in. So most people live to the east of this Hu line. Okay, and if you want to understand some geographical number statistic, I think the rainfall on the east side of this line on average is 10 times or 15 times more than to the west. So if you live to the west, historically, you have to live like a nomadic life. Right now, the government, I think, is trying to use different technology to improve the land and the environment there. Maybe in the future, some of the Chinese people can move there, so we won't be so densely populated in just a small region of the country. Okay, now let's dive a little deeper into this, okay? And listen closely. I had several long conversations with my friends in Europe on this subject of economic activities in relationship to population. If you have a big country, okay, and a small population, you can, in what I would call, you can cherry pick economic activities to maximize your standard of living. All right. For example, Norway, small population, 5.5 million, rich in natural resources. You can pick the easiest economic activities with the least amount of effort and live a comfortable life, like selling oil, natural gases, and raw material, for example. However, if you have a bigger population in Norway, let's say 50 million or 100 million, now selling just natural resources might not be enough to feed everyone, or let's say to keep everyone at the same level of standard of living compared to when you only have 5 million people. You need to work harder, produce more in order to earn the same level of standard of living. And eventually, a lot of people have to go do occupations and jobs they might not like or enjoy. You can consider China to be at the far end of that spectrum, okay? On the one hand, there are people who worry about birth rate. Yes, in China, it is a problem right now. But at the same time, millions of college graduates annually cannot find a proper job. We just cannot create meaningful jobs fast enough for so many new graduates. Especially today, we have AI and automation to do the work, and also with many economic sanctions stacking up towards us. So I would say that there's a common understanding that if we have fewer people in China, there will be lesser problems, lesser pressure, also on the government to handle. And that's reflected in, I would say, the lack of urgency from the government. I think even the central government want to just let the population slide down a bit and see what happens. And just to be clear and unbiased here, okay? In today's world, you don't need a lot of people to fight and win war if China is to go to war. Drones and precision weaponries will do the job. So, for people who are scared about China invading the world, instead of me telling you that China is not expansionist, what you need to know is that your fear should not be linked to the population size, the shrinking population size, but to the massive industrial capacity of China. Okay. So if there's an eventual war to be had with, let's say, the United States, it will be over the accessibility of trade to the rest of the world. The US want to contain China and not allow it to trade freely with the rest of the world. And China do not want to be contained and want to expand that trade because trade increase prosperity. So this situation is similar to, compared to pre-World War One, when the British Empire want to try to contain Germany, which then lead to the second part of this video, the economic impact related to the shrinking population, or I would just say that slight shrinking population in China right now. And today, again, for the first time in my channel, I'm going to introduce to you guys the great ex-mayor of Chongqing, okay? Mr. Huang Qifan. And just give you guys a quick introduction, okay? He's I would consider a macro economist and the ex-mayor of Chongqing, one of the biggest city in the world by certain measurements, especially population. Within its administrative zone, it has over 32 million people, I think, today. He's a senior member of the Chinese Communist Party and very well respected. And there's a lot of politicians in China and around the world, I would say, who just want to, ask kiss their superior, those always doing those kind of things. But Huang is not one of them. So when he speaks, there's usually more substance in what he's trying to say. And he's not afraid of pointing out the ugly reality in China, all right? I'm going to translate just a small part of his speech he gave, I think, last month. Here we go. And I'm certain that my non-Chinese audience will learn something from this, okay? All right. China has 230 million household of farmers. That's 230 million household, okay? Not individuals. On average, each family runs only 1 acres of farmland. Out of that 230 million household, 210 million household of farmers own less than 1.5 acres of farmland. 1.5 acres. And if an average household has 3 individual members, that's a total of 630 million people. All right. And the average return of agriculture goods from that 1.5 acres of land is only about 200,000 renminbi to 300,000 renminbi per year. Remember, there are a lot of farmers that do not even have 1.5 acres of land because that's average, right? But have less. So the average household income of these farmers is roughly 30,000 renminbi. That's, by the way, I would say on the higher estimation, okay? And if you do the math here, that's about 4,000 USD annually. So roughly 300 US dollar monthly in terms of household income, all right? So when we look at the real statistic estimation here, nearly half of the population in China has a monthly household income of less than 300 US dollar. And if each individual household consists of, let's say, just 3 individuals, that's less than 100 USD per month per person. Okay? That's equal to about 1,200 US dollar GDP per capita. Let me give you guys some reference here what this is, okay? The poorest country in Europe today, which is by Google, Ukraine, has a per capita GDP of 5,100 US dollars. So about 5 times of that of an average Chinese farmer, which consists of half the Chinese population. It's very important for my audience to remember this number, okay? It is unfair to blame this poverty on the Chinese farmer because we have a huge population and only a small amount of farmland. If you compare that to the United States, okay, on average, each US farming household has 445 acres of land. So on average, each US farmer has 400 times of land than an average Chinese farmer. 400 times, okay? If you compare that to EU, an average EU household has farmers that is, has around 40 acres of land. In Southeast Asia, I believe is around 5 acres to 10 acres. So even Southeast Asia have several times higher than that of China in terms of average household farmland. Okay. Now you guys see how crowded China is. So over the next 5 years, according to ex-mayor Huang here, Chinese government should focus on moving the majority of those 630 million people out of the traditional farmland and into towns and cities and provide them with the same social benefit that the current urban population enjoys. Sounds fair, right? So 630 million people need to move from farmland to city. And as a reference, okay, the entire European Union has a population of 448 million. So we're trying to move 630 million people into towns and cities. Okay, I want to help my audience to visualize what is going on in China. And this is not unique among developing countries, but I talk to many friends in Europe and here in the US, and they're very confused. And I understand what they are confused about, okay? Okay, let's do this. We can divide China into three zones, okay? Three groups of population. I'm going to put it up on my screen right now so you guys can get a clear reference. In zone A, okay, there are roughly 200 to 300 million people who is currently enjoying, I would say, the standard of living and will the purchasing power that can classify as developed countries population. These are the people I consider who are more or less integrated with the rest of the global economy. And also, these are the people that likely you are talking right now on, let's say, TikTok and Red if you find, all those Chinese people to talk to. These people are, I would say, considered in zone A, okay? Now, zone B, I would consider there are roughly around 300 to 400 million people in China belonging to zone B. They earn a relatively lower salary income. Their economic activity interact closely with the people in zone A, but not that much with the rest of the world. Only partially. So I consider them to be semi-integrated with the rest of the world. I'm going to get back to these zones to explain a little bit more so you get a clear picture, okay? Now, zone C is what I consider what ex-mayor Huang here is referring to here. So around 600 million to 700 million people in China currently belong to zone C, which their per capita GDP is around 1,000 US dollar annually. Okay, so only a quarter of that of Ukraine. Okay, let's dive deeper into this. I don't think I need to explain zone A that much because that's an average European Americans. On paper, they make less money, but their cost of living is also lower. So the standard of living is roughly the same. Okay, there are richer people in this zone and there are poor people. But more or less, their standard of living is up there with the rest of the developed countries. Now, let's talk about Zone B, which it gets more interesting. And for people who haven't been to China, they probably will get confused about this. I will make one example, okay? You will get a clear understanding. I was with my European partners in Beijing several years ago, doing product installation for a hospital, okay? And there were also several Chinese mechanics who are there to learn from the European mechanics so that when the European mechanics leave, the Chinese mechanic can take over and do future maintenance and also future installation. So one day we were ordering lunch together, right? Our European mechanic ordered pizza online. Costs around 10 US dollar with drinks. And remember, this is in Beijing, okay? One of the more or most expensive city in China. The Chinese mechanics asked me what I want to eat, and I said I would just eat whatever you guys eat, okay? So they open up this Chinese app, this Chinese Uber Eat, okay? And they order Chinese lunch boxes. And I remember there are several options, and many of them order this lunch box with white rice and scrambled eggs, spicy scrambled egg with spicy pickles.我记得好像是这个中文叫什么那个酸辣豆角炒鸡蛋 something like that, okay, in Chinese. And then it also come with some extra vegetables on the side, okay? The entire lunchbox is around 75 cents to 1 US dollar, depending on what side you pick. And I was like, okay, that looks good. And on the side, okay, there's this nice looking roast duck leg, which costs another extra 2 US dollars. So I told them that, okay, I will have that lunchbox and the roast duck leg as a side. And all the mechanics and also the translator, okay, they all looked at me and said, okay, you're not from our company because our boss do not pay us enough to afford that kind of lunch. So they look at me if I'm just totally spoiled, okay? So we're talking about just a lunch, the lunch box and the duck leg is around what, 3 US dollar. And I would say that I'm not a stranger to this. So we're talking about people in Zone B who are making around, I would say, 400 US dollar to maybe 1,000 US dollar per month. And it doesn't sound that bad, I would say, because the cost of living is much lower in China. Especially when these people do not spend all the time living in Beijing. They go back to their hometown and it's much cheaper there, the food and all the stuff. And they also have to, let's say, pay for transportation. They have to pay for rents for their apartment, utility, all those kind of things. And usually, I would say, when they come out and live by themselves, we're talking about like a share room. And also, they have to save money, okay? So they can't afford to have a lunch that is a lot more than just 1 US dollar. Now, the pizza, the European mechanics order was 10 US dollar. And as a reference, in China, a McDonald's meal is around 5 US dollars. So a McDonald's lunch is considered for these people in Zone B, I would say, like super luxury for them. And that's Zone B we're talking about here. We haven't even get to Zone C. Now, in Zone C, the average income is several times less than that of Zone B. And it's not just poor, okay? I want my audience to understand what is going on here. The correct way of looking at this and understand this regarding Zone C, which Mayor Huang is suggesting the government, to fix these problems and give them, try to get them to a higher standard of living. What we are looking at is that these people are not really attached to the modern day Chinese economy. Not in a way that we understand here in the West, okay? what I can say is that they are fed and they are dressed, so they won't freeze to death and they won't starve to death. But that's about it. They do not have safe drinking water. They do not have constant electricity. And their overall standard of living is very, very low. You can say that another perk they have is that they're not in the middle of a war zone. And a lot of places around the earth right now is, in the middle of a war. So they do not have to suffer that, at least. Now, I'm not too sure if my audience, my American audience or European audience, understand what this is. This is not just income inequality. It is literally on a different planet. Okay. In US, for example, I've driven across the entire US. Okay, from San Diego all the way up to Seattle, from Chicago to St. Louis, and all the way down to New Orleans, and from Boston to Miami, and to many places as well. I also driven across the entire Canada from Vancouver all the way to Montreal. God, like 30 hours or something. I will say that the entire US population is roughly in just one zone. Okay, there are poor people and rich people. I'm not disputing that, but the entire economy is more or less evenly monetized. Okay, I don't know what other word to use. Monetize, I think, is quite a good word. This is not just about the rich or the poor. If you want to be very picky, maybe US is right now splitting up into maybe zone A and B, but there's no zone C. Okay, you can go to the poorest town in United States. I think I've driven to some of the towns that are really suffering economically. But if you go there, live there, and go get an average breakfast in the morning in the restaurant, it's much cheaper than here in Los Angeles, but it won't be 5 times or 10 times cheaper. In China, that can swing 10 times, 20 times the difference. Same with, I would say, Europe, EU. Almost everyone in Europe, in EU, I would say either live in zone A or B, worse in B, but there's no zone C, okay? The closest I can get, I've never been to Ukraine, but I think I've driven down to some smaller village in Bosnia. I think that might close to, the closest I can get in Europe, to zone C, I would say. However, what is a good reference or example is, let me use, I would say, India as an example. Okay, I know I tried to make a video especially just for India. There were a few Chinese economists who had deep in-depth study of the India's economy, and they came to a conclusion that less than 10% of the current Indian population belong to this roughly zone A and zone B. There are over 90% of the Indian population that actually belong to zone C, so not really connected to the global economy, or not even connected to what we call regular monetized economy. And my Indian friends can correct me on this if I'm wrong, okay? Now, going back to what I'm trying to say here today, which my audience have to pay closer attention now. If you compare China's GDP to EU's GDP, it is roughly the same, around 17 to 18 trillion. But what you are actually comparing is the entire EU versus just half of China. Oh, when we are talking about, especially here, the population, okay? Because there are 600 to 700 million people in China. They're not really accounted for in the GDP calculation. They belong to this shadow economy that I would say 700 million people account for maybe less than 2-3% of the total Chinese GDP. So imagine, the poorest country in Europe, Ukraine, right? 5,000 GDP per capita. Half of the people in China is only a quarter of that. If you are able to bring the living standard of those 700 million people to the level of Ukraine, that already present a huge amount of growth potential. right? So for people who are saying that the China's economy is already plateauing and will not grow anymore, or that the population has messed up, which it has, and because we have a population decline right now, the economic growth will stop and become impossible. Those people have absolutely no idea what they are talking about. Okay, and it's going to take a lot of work, I would say, to bring 700 million people to the level of just Ukraine, okay? Which is nothing really to bolster about. That's not going to be an easy task, by the way. But definitely, it is not an impossible task given how far behind they are to begin with right now. So, when we Chinese, let's say if both me and you, we're Chinese, government leadership, we don't really care that much whether we have 9 million newborn babies or only, let's say this year only 8.5 million. We think more about how to move the people from zone B to zone A and how we can move the people from zone C into zone B. So mathematically speaking, it shouldn't be that hard for China's GDP to double again within 2 decades. And for people who see GDP as a very poor way of measuring an economy, I agree with you. And in that case, I would say that it won't be impossible if China's, let's say, total energy consumption double within the next few decades. So to reach a higher standard of living, you need to consume more energy, right? That's the way to go. So all this talk about China wanting to rule the world, we really do not have the time for that at the moment. We have our own problems to take care of. Maybe come back and ask us again in 50 years. Maybe our mind will change. And China's growth also shouldn't incentivize fear. Often it just reflects more Chinese people get to improve their standard of living and have a more comfortable life and a more dignified life. And I think people around the world should celebrate that achievement. There are many problems within the Chinese economy that we need to solve, but I want to keep this channel mainly focused on global international affair. But I will try to slip in maybe a video or two every month regarding domestic issue in China. It will help my audience definitely to get a more inclusive understanding of China. So what I say here regarding, let's say, foreign affair will be more relatable in that way, and you guys will not get confused and get some weird hypothesis about China, which is I've seen it a lot in the comment section that it's just unreal. All right, if you have any question, please let me know. I will see you guys in the next video.